Jake Miller stood in the middle of 200 alien cadets and tried not to look nervous. The huge metal room on Kepler Station buzzed with strange sounds. Some aliens clicked their teeth. Others made low growling noises. A few hissed like angry cats. Jake was one of only 3 humans in the whole place. The room smelled weird too. It was like a mix of old leather, wet dirt, and something that reminded Jake of his grandmother's medicine cabinet. He breathed through his mouth and hoped he would get used to it soon. "Listen up, cadets." Commander Zephyr's voice boomed across the room. The tall lizard-like alien wore a dark blue uniform covered in shiny metals. His yellow eyes looked mean as they moved across the crowd. When those eyes stopped on Jake, the human felt his stomach twist. "Today begins your final survival test," the commander said. His long tail swished behind him as he talked. "You have 72 hours. 3 full days. You will go to the wilderness zone with nothing but your basic suits. No weapons, no fancy gadgets, no help from anyone." Jake looked around at the other cadets. Most of them were much bigger than him. The Vorthak looked like giant bears that walked on 2 legs. Their thick fur was dark brown, and their claws were as long as Jake's fingers. 3 of them stood together near the front. The biggest one, who had scars across his face, kept looking at Jake and grinning. It was not a friendly grin. The insect aliens called Zutan were about Jake's height, but much wider. Their green shells looked tough as armor. 4 of them whispered to each other in their clicking language. Their big black eyes reflected the bright lights above. Jake had learned that when they clicked fast like that, they were usually making fun of someone. There was also a Gornite in the group. This alien looked like a walking rock pile. His skin was gray and bumpy like concrete. His name was Thex, and he was famous for being able to eat actual stones. Jake had seen him do it during lunch one day. The crunching sound still made Jake feel sick, but the alien that worried Jake the most was Prince Vexstar. He belonged to the Zephyrian Empire, and everyone knew his people loved to fight. The prince was tall and thin with purple skin. Sharp spikes grew from his elbows and knees. His fingers ended in claws that could cut through metal. Right now, those claws were tapping against his leg as he stared at the human cadets. "The weak will fail," Commander Zephyr continued. "The strong will survive. Some of you think you already know who is weak." His eyes found Jake again. You might be surprised. Jake felt his face get hot. He knew what everyone thought about humans. They thought humans were soft and stupid. Most aliens believed humans only got into the academy because the Galactic Council felt sorry for them. Jake had heard the whispers in the hallways. He had seen the looks when he struggled to lift weights that were easy for other species. "Your test area has many different environments," the commander explained. "Thick forest, rocky hills, deep valleys, open fields. Each of you will find some areas harder than others. That is the point." A hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a big piece of land with mountains, trees, and rivers. Different colored dots showed where each cadet would start. Jake squinted at the display and found his dot. It was in a place marked Sector 7. The area looked rocky and dry with very few trees. "You will be dropped at different starting points," Commander Zephyr said. "Food and water are limited. You must find your own. You must make your own shelter. You must survive on your own skills." The commander's tail hit the floor with a loud thump. "But remember this, cadets. You are not alone out there. Others will want the same resources you need. How you handle that conflict will determine if you pass or fail." Jake's hands started to sweat inside his gloves. He looked around for his fellow humans. Lisa Parker stood about 20 feet away. She was tall with red hair and green eyes. She was much better at talking to aliens than Jake was. Her sector was marked as Sector 12, which looked like thick forest. Tom Brooks was on the other side of the room. He was shorter than Jake, but much stronger. His dark skin was covered in sweat, and his brown eyes looked worried. His sector was Sector 3, which appeared to be mostly open grassland. Jake realized they would all be separated. The 3 humans would face this test alone, surrounded by aliens who thought they were weak and useless. "Transportation begins in 10 minutes, Commander Zephyr announced. Collect your environmental suits and prepare for deployment. The cadets moved toward the equipment area. Jake walked slowly, thinking about what he had just heard. Everyone expected a fight over food and water. The aliens all seemed excited about the chance to prove how strong and tough they were, but Jake was not strong or tough, at least not compared to the others. A Vorthok could probably break him in half without trying hard. A Ziton could move twice as fast as him. The Gurnite could eat rocks that would break Jake's teeth. And Prince Vextar could cut him up with those sharp claws as Jake picked up. His gray environmental suit, he noticed something interesting. All the other cadets were talking about fighting and winning and showing dominance. They were planning to take what they wanted by force. They expected the test to be about who was strongest and most aggressive. Jake had grown up on Earth reading about survival situations. He knew that the smartest survivors were often not the strongest ones. They were the ones who used their brains instead of their muscles. They were the ones who saw opportunities that others missed. They were the ones who won by not fighting. At all. The environmental suit felt heavy as Jake put it on. It would protect him from extreme temperatures and provide basic life support, but that was all. No weapons, no tools, no communication devices. Just him and whatever he could find in the wilderness. "Hey, human!" a rough voice called out. Jake turned to see the scarred Vorthak walking toward him. The alien was at least 7 feet tall and probably weighed 4 times as much as Jake. His claws scraped against the metal floor. "I am Grax," the alien said. His voice was deep and growling. "I wanted to meet the tiny creature that thinks it can survive with real warriors." Jake looked up at the massive alien. "Nice to meet you, Grax." "I'm Jake." Grax laughed, showing teeth like yellow daggers. "You will not last one day, little human. When you get hungry and scared, remember that Grax tried to warn you." "I'll remember," Jake said quietly. The big alien walked away, still laughing. Other aliens had watched the conversation. Jake could see them pointing at him and making their various alien sounds of amusement. 5 minutes later, Jake was sitting in a small transport ship with 5 other cadets heading to Sector 7, the Vorthak. Named Grax was there, along with 2 others from his species. The 4 Zitons sat together, clicking softly. Prince Vextar sat alone, his purple skin looking almost black in the dim light of the ship. Jake stared out the small window at the wilderness below. It looked harsh and unwelcoming. Rocky hills stretched in all directions. A small stream twisted through the landscape like a silver snake. There were very few trees, mostly just scrub brush and scattered boulders. This was where he would spend the next 3 days. This was where he would either prove that humans belonged in the Galactic Military Academy, or where he would fail in front of everyone who already thought humans were worthless. The transport ship began to descend. Jake took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing heart. In a few minutes, the real test would begin. The transport ship landed with a hard bump that made Jake's teeth rattle. Through the small window, he could see nothing but rocks and dust. The door slid open with a hiss and hot, dry air rushed into the cabin. It smelled like baked stone and old metal. "Out," the pilot yelled. "You have 5 seconds before I leave." Jake grabbed his water bottle and jumped out of the ship. His boots hit the rocky ground just as the door slammed shut behind him. The ship roared back into the sky, leaving the 6 cadets standing in a cloud of dust and engine smoke. When the dust settled, Jake looked around at his new home for the next 3 days. Sector 7 was even worse than it had looked from the air. Sharp rocks stuck up from the ground like broken teeth. The sun beat down without mercy. There were no trees big enough to provide shade, just twisted bush with thorns and a few scraggly plants that looked half dead, about 200 yards. Away, Jake could see a thin stream of water flowing between steep banks. That would be the most important place in the whole sector. Every living thing would need that water to survive. Grax. The big Vorthak with the scarred face was already walking toward the stream with long, confident steps. The other 2 Vorthak followed him like loyal dogs. Their thick fur would protect them from the heat better than Jake's environmental suit protected him. The 4 Ziton moved in perfect formation, spreading out to explore the area in all directions at once. They clicked to each other constantly, sharing information faster than Jake could think. Within minutes, they had mapped every rock, bush, and hiding spot within 100 yards. Prince Vexstar stood perfectly still for almost a full minute, just watching and listening. Then he began walking slowly around the area, stopping every few steps to scratch marks into rocks with his sharp claws. Jake realized the prince was marking territory like a wild animal, claiming the best spots for himself. Vex, the rock-eating Gornite, was doing something completely different. He was picking up stones and biting them, testing their hardness and mineral content. Some rocks he spit out with disgust. Others he crunched up and swallowed with obvious pleasure. Jake watched in amazement as the alien ate a chunk of granite, like it was a candy bar dot, while all the other cadets were busy showing off their natural abilities. Jake started doing what humans did best. He began to observe and think. First, he looked at the water source. The stream was only about 3 feet wide and maybe 1 foot deep. It flowed from a crack in the rocks at the base of a small cliff and disappeared into a pile of boulders about 50 yards downstream. The banks on both sides were steep and slippery. There was only one easy place to get down to the water, and that spot was right where Grax had decided to set up camp. Jake noticed that the Vortheg had chosen their position. Well, the shallow cave behind them would provide shelter from the heat. The rocks around the cave mouth could be used as walls for defense. Anyone who wanted water would have to come close to them, where their size and strength would be most useful. But Jake also noticed things the others had missed. The cliff face above the stream was covered in loose rocks that looked ready to fall. Some of the boulders near the water were balanced in ways that seemed unstable. The stream itself had carved deep grooves in the stone over many years, creating hidden channels and weak points in the rock. Jake started walking around the area, pretending to be confused and lost. He picked up random rocks and sticks, looking at them like he had never seen such things before. He stumbled over obvious obstacles and bumped into bush. To anyone watching, he looked like a helpless creature who did not understand how to survive in the wilderness. This was exactly what Jake wanted them to think. While he stumbled around like a fool, Jake was actually studying the landscape with the trained eye of an engineer. His grandfather had been a construction worker who taught Jake about leverage, balance, and structural weaknesses. His father was a mechanical engineer who had shown Jake how simple machines could multiply force and create mechanical advantage. His mother was a puzzle designer who had taught him to see patterns and connections that others missed. Jake found a narrow passage between 2 large rocks that led from the main area down toward the stream. It was the only other route to the water besides the path that Grax was guarding. But the passage was barely wide enough for one person, and the rocks on both sides were cracked and loose. He discovered a flat area, surrounded by thorn bush where the aliens would probably gather if they needed to fight over resources. The ground there was hard-packed dirt with several large stones scattered around. It looked like a natural arena. Most interesting of all, Jake found an old dead tree that had fallen across a gap between 2 cliff faces. The tree was still strong enough to hold weight, and its branches reached into a grove of younger trees on the other side. From up there, a person could see everything that happened in the main area below. As Jake explored, he kept one eye on what the other cadets were doing. The longer he watched, the more he understood how each species approached problems. The Vorthik relied completely on their size and strength. They expected to intimidate others into giving up resources without a fight. When intimidation failed, they would use brute force to take what they wanted. Their strategy was simple: be bigger and meaner than everyone else. The Zatan worked as a perfect team, but they thought like soldiers in an army. They gathered information, made plans, and executed those plans with precise coordination. They expected to win through superior numbers and better organization. Prince Vexstar was a warrior who believed in personal combat. He was marking territory and preparing for individual battles. He expected to defeat his enemies one at a time through superior fighting skills and natural weapons. Vex the Gornite was harder to understand. He seemed to be evaluating the mineral content of the area like he was planning to eat his way through any problems. His species probably solved most difficulties by being too tough for anything to hurt them. All of these approaches had one thing in common. They all expected to win through some form of direct confrontation. They all believed that the strongest, fastest, toughest, or most numerous would claim victory, but Jake had learned something different growing up on Earth. Humans were not the strongest or fastest or toughest species on their own planet. They had survived and thrived by being smarter than their competitors. They had learned to use tools, work together, and solve problems in ways that bigger and stronger creatures never imagined. As the first day went on, Jake continued his act of helpless wandering. He collected seemingly random objects, sturdy vines, straight sticks, rocks of various sizes, and strips of bark from the dead trees. To the other cadets, it looked like the confused human was just picking up trash. The other aliens began to ignore him completely. Grax and his Vorthak friends laughed every time they saw Jake trip over something or struggle to climb over a small rock. The Zitan stopped including him in their territorial calculations, deciding he was too pathetic to be a threat. Prince Vexstar did not even bother to mark territory near Jake's wandering path. This was perfect. The more harmless Jake appeared, the less attention they would pay to his real activities. By the time the sun started to set, the temperature began to drop quickly. Jake had found a sheltered spot between two large boulders where he could stay warm and hidden. More importantly, he had identified every key location in Sector 7 and begun to understand how the terrain could be used to his advantage. The other cadets had spent the day establishing dominance and preparing for the fights they expected to come. Jake had spent the day preparing for a completely different kind of contest. Tomorrow, he would begin building his secret weapons. Jake woke up before the sun rose on the second day. His body was sore from sleeping on hard rocks, but his mind was clear and focused. While the other cadets were still sleeping, he had work to do. The air was cold in the early morning. Jake could see his breath as he quietly gathered the materials he had collected the day before. He had hidden them in small piles around the sector, always making sure no one saw him. Put anything in the same place twice. His first stop was the narrow passage between the rocks that led down to the water. This path was the secret route that bypassed Grax and his Vorthak guards. Jake knew that eventually, someone would try to use this passage to reach the stream without being seen. Jake had studied this spot carefully yesterday. The walls of the passage were made of loose, cracked stone. Several large rocks were barely held in place by smaller stones underneath. If those smaller supporting stones were removed, the larger rocks would fall, working as quietly as possible. Jake began to build his first trap. He used a thick piece of vine to connect 3 small stones in a line across the path. The vine was hidden under a thin layer of dust and pebbles. When someone stepped on it, the stones would pull apart and remove the supports holding up a big boulder overhead. The boulder would not fall directly on anyone. Jake had angled it carefully so it would crash down in front of whoever triggered the trap, blocking their path and probably scaring them badly. The Academy's safety systems would protect anyone from serious injury, but being suddenly trapped by falling rocks would definitely surprise them. Jake tested the mechanism 3 times to make sure it worked properly. Each time, the boulder fell exactly where he wanted it to. Then he reset the trap and covered his tracks. His next project was much more complicated. Jake had found several sturdy vines that were almost as strong as rope. Working in the pre-dawn darkness, he began weaving them together into a large net. His mother had taught him basic weaving when he was young, and his father had shown him how to calculate load-bearing weights for different materials. The net took almost 2 hours to make. When it was finished, it was roughly 10 feet by 10 feet and strong enough to hold several people at once. Jake tested it by filling it with rocks and lifting it off the ground. The vines held perfectly. Carrying the net to the flat area where he expected confrontations to happen, Jake looked up at the dead tree he had discovered yesterday. The tree lay across the gap between 2 cliff faces, about 15 feet above the ground. Its branches reached into the living trees on the far side, Climbing up to the dead tree was harder than Jake had expected. His environmental suit was not designed for rock climbing, and his human strength was much less than what the other species possessed. But humans had one advantage that served Jake well now. They were excellent climbers compared to most aliens. Millions of years of swinging through trees had given humans flexible joints and a good sense of balance. It took Jake almost an hour to get the net up into the trees and set up the pulley system he had planned. He used strong vines as ropes and carefully selected branches as anchor points. The mechanism was simple but effective. When Jake pulled on one particular vine from his hiding spot, the net would drop down onto anyone standing in the flat area. Below. By the time the sun came up, Jake had also set up several smaller traps along the main pathways. He made snares from twisted vines that would catch feet and hands without causing real harm. He balanced rocks in places where they would fall and block paths when disturbed. He even dug a few shallow holes and covered them with thin branches and leaves, creating pitfalls that would trip up anyone moving too fast. Each trap was designed with the same philosophy. Jake did not want to hurt anyone seriously. He wanted to surprise them, slow them down, and make them think twice about using force to solve their problems. As the morning progressed, the other cadets began to wake up and move around. Jake quickly returned to his harmless wandering act. Picking up random objects and looking confused about everything he saw, the water situation was becoming critical. Yesterday, everyone had still had some water left in their bottles from the start of the exercise. Today those bottles were empty, or nearly empty. The stream was the only source of fresh water in Sector 7, and Grax had made it clear that he controlled access to it. Jake watched from a distance as the first confrontation of the day developed. Two of the Ziton approached the water source, where Grax and his Vorthak allies were resting. The insects moved carefully, their black eyes constantly scanning for threats. Grax stood up slowly when he saw them coming. Even sitting down, the big alien was taller than the Ziton. When he stood to his full height, he looked like a mountain of fur and muscle. "Water costs food," Grax announced in his deep, growling voice. "You give me half your rations, I let you drink." The Zitan clicked rapidly to each other. Jake had learned enough of their language to understand that they were discussing whether to pay Grax's price or try to fight him. After a few seconds of consultation, they reluctantly handed over small packages of food. Grax examined the packages and nodded. "You may drink, quickly." The Ziton hurried down to the stream, filled their water bottles, and left as fast as they could. Grax smiled with satisfaction and settled back down to wait for the next customers. Jake realized that this system would not last long. There were 6 cadets in the sector, but only enough food for about 2 days if everyone shared equally. If Grax kept demanding payment for water access, some cadets would run out of food by tonight. Sure enough, when Prince Vexstar approached the water later that morning, he was not interested in making deals. "Stand aside, furry beast," the prince commanded. His purple skin seemed to glow in the sunlight, and his claws extended to their full length. "I am royalty. I do not pay tribute to commoners." Grax laughed and stood up. His 2 Vorthak friends moved to stand beside him. "You are royalty of nothing here, Spikeskin. Pay food or stay thirsty," Prince Vexstar hissed like an angry snake. "I challenge you to single combat for control of the water source." "I accept," Grax replied immediately. Single combat was a concept that all warrior species understood and respected. Jake watched the fight from his hiding place behind a large boulder. It was brutal but brief. Prince Vexstar was fast and his claws were deadly, but Grax was much stronger and his thick fur protected him from the worst cuts. After about 5 minutes of circling and slashing, Grax managed to grab the prince and throw him against a rock wall. Prince Vexstar hit the wall hard and slid to the ground. He was not seriously injured, but he was clearly defeated. The Academy's medical sensors would have intervened if there had been any real danger, but the prince's pride was badly damaged. "Anyone else want to challenge?" Grax asked loudly. No one answered. Vex Gornite was strong enough to fight Grax, but he seemed more interested in eating interesting rocks than fighting over water. The remaining Zitan were tough, but not tough enough to take on 3 Vorthok at once. Jake continued his harmless wandering, but now he was checking his traps and making final adjustments. The system was almost complete. He had created a network of surprises that covered all the main routes through Sector 7. More importantly, he had figured out how to use the terrain itself as a weapon. As the day went on, hunger and thirst made all the cadets more desperate and angry. Grax continued to demand food in exchange for water, but his prices kept going up. The Zitan were starting to look at each other with hungry eyes, and Jake suspected they might soon decide to work together. To overwhelm the Vorthok guards, Prince Vexstar had withdrawn to the far side of the sector to lick his wounds and plan revenge. Vex continued eating rocks and seemed uninterested in the growing conflict, but Jake noticed that the Gornite was slowly moving closer to the main area. By sunset, Jake could feel the tension building toward an explosion. Tomorrow would be the final day of the exercise, and desperation would make everyone more willing to take risks. The time for clever planning was almost over. Soon it would be time to see if human ingenuity could really defeat alien strength. The third day began with the sound of angry voices. Jake woke up to hear Prince Vexstar shouting challenges at anyone who would listen. The purple alien had spent all night planning his revenge against Grax, and now he was ready to fight again. Jake peeked out from his hiding spot between the rocks. The prince stood in the middle of the flat area, his claws fully extended and his spikes bristling with rage. His royal pride had been hurt badly by yesterday's defeat, and he was not thinking clearly anymore. "I demand satisfaction." Prince Vexstar yelled, "The water belongs to everyone, not just to hairy beasts who think strength makes them kings." Grax and his 2 Vorthok friends came out of their cave slowly. They looked tired and hungry, but still dangerous. 3 days without much food had made them meaner than usual. "You lost already, Spikeskin," Grax growled. "Go away before I throw." "You against more rocks? I challenge all 3 of you." The prince shouted, "If I win, everyone gets equal access to the water." The 4 Zitan heard this and began clicking excitedly to each other. They were tired of paying food for water, and they liked the idea of someone else fighting their battles for them. They moved closer to watch the confrontation. Vex the Gornite also approached the flat area. The rock-eating alien had been mostly peaceful so far, but Jake could see hunger in his stone-gray eyes. Even aliens who ate rocks needed water to survive. Jake quietly climbed up to his observation post in the dead tree. From up there, he could see everything that was about to happen. More importantly, he could control his trap network from this position. "3 against 1 is not fair," one of the Zitan called out. "We will help the prince fight for water freedom." This changed everything. Now it would be 3 Vorthok against 1 Zephyrian prince and 4 Zitan insects. 5 against 3 were better odds, but Jake knew that Grax and his friends were still much stronger than their opponents. "Fine," Grax snarled. "We fight all of you soft weaklings at once. When we win, water will cost even more food." The 2 groups faced each other in the flat area, exactly where Jake had hoped they would gather. Prince Vexstar stood at the front of his alliance, his claws ready for battle. The Zitan spread out behind him in their perfect formation. Grax and his Vorthok allies bunched together, relying on their size and strength. None of them noticed the thin vines hidden in the grass at their feet. None of them saw the carefully balanced net hanging in the trees above them. They were all focused on the coming fight. "Attack!" Prince Vexstar screamed and charged toward the water source. This was exactly what Jake had been waiting for. The prince ran straight toward the stream, following the main path that led directly through Jake's best trap. His claws were extended, and his eyes were fixed on Grax's throat. Jake watched as Prince Vexstar's foot hit the hidden trigger mechanism. The vine snapped tight, pulling away the small stones that supported the large boulder on the cliff face above the stream. The boulder fell with a thunderous crash, but not where anyone expected. Instead of falling straight down, it swung sideways on the vine system Jake had rigged. The huge rock swept across the path like a giant hammer, catching Prince Vexstar in the side and knocking him completely off his feet. The prince flew through the air and landed with a tremendous splash in the shallow stream. He was not seriously hurt, but he was soaking wet, covered in mud, and completely shocked. His royal dignity was ruined as he sat in the water with his mouth hanging open. "What happened?" Grax shouted, looking around in confusion. "Where did that rock come from?" But there was no time to figure it out. The Zitan had seen their leader knocked down, and now they were attacking the Vorthek with desperate fury. Their strategy was to use speed and coordination to overwhelm the stronger aliens. The 4 insects spread out and charged toward Grax and his friends. They moved in perfect formation, coming from different directions at the same time. It was a good plan, but Jake had prepared for this too. The Zitan ran straight into the network of vine snares that Jake had hidden along all the main pathways. The first alien stepped on a concealed loop and suddenly found his leg jerked out from under him. He crashed to the ground and immediately became tangled in more vines as he tried to get up. The second Zitan tried to jump over his fallen companion, but he landed right on another snare. This one caught his arm and spun him around in a circle. The more he struggled, the more tangled he became. The third and fourth Zitan saw what was happening and tried to stop, but they were moving too fast. They crashed into their already trapped teammates, and soon all 4 insects were wrapped up in Jake's vine network like presents under a Christmas tree. "This is impossible," one of the Zitan clicked frantically. "These traps were not here yesterday." Grax and his Vorthak friends stood watching in amazement as their enemies defeated themselves. But their confusion quickly turned to anger. "Someone is playing tricks on us," Grax roared. "Show yourself, coward!" The big alien looked around wildly, trying to figure out who was responsible for the strange accidents. His eyes fell on Jake, who was still pretending to wander around harmlessly near the edge of the flat area. "You!" Grax pointed at the human. "Little soft thing, what do you know about this?" Jake tried to look confused and frightened. "I don't know what you mean," he said in a shaky voice. "I was just looking for food." Grax started walking toward Jake with murder in his eyes. The other 2 Vorthek followed him. They had eliminated all their other enemies through traps and accidents, but now they wanted someone to blame for the strange events. "I think the tiny human is smarter than he looks," Grax growled. "Maybe we should step on him and see what happens." This was the moment Jake had been planning for. All 3 Vorthak were walking together toward the center of the flat area, directly under his hidden net. They were angry and not paying attention to anything except their desire to catch him. Jake waited until they were in perfect position. Then he pulled hard on the release vine. The net dropped from the trees like a giant spider web. It fell perfectly over all 3 Vorthek, wrapping them up before they could react. The more they struggled, the more tangled they became. Their own great strength worked against them as they pulled the net tighter and tighter around their bodies. "What is this?" Grax shouted as he fought against the vines. "How is this possible?" Jake stopped pretending to be helpless. He stood up straight and walked calmly toward the trapped aliens. For the first time since the exercise began, he looked confident and in control. "It's called engineering," Jake said quietly. "Humans learned a long time ago that being smart is better than being strong." Prince Vextar had finally climbed out of the stream. He stood dripping wet and staring at Jake with new respect. "You did all this? The falling rock, the snares, the net?" "Yes," Jake replied. "I've been building traps for 2 days while you were all busy showing off." Vex, the Gornite, had watched the entire battle without moving. Now he approached Jake slowly, his stone-gray eyes filled with curiosity rather than anger. "Explain, Vex," said in his deep, rumbling voice. "How did one small human defeat all the warriors?" Jake smiled. "I'll be happy to explain. But first, does anyone want to share the water peacefully instead of fighting over it?" Jake looked around at the scene in front of him. Prince Vextar sat in the mud by the stream, dripping wet and looking very confused. The 4 Zitan were tangled up in vines like fish caught in a net. Grax and his 2 Vorthek friends were wrapped up so tightly in Jake's net that they could barely move. Only Vex the Gornite was still free, and he was staring at Jake with amazement. "This is not possible," Grax growled from inside the net. Humans are weak. Humans are stupid. How did you do this? Jake walked over to where the big alien was trapped. I'm going to help you get free, he said calmly. But first, I want to explain something to all of you. Help us? Prince Vexstar asked from the stream. Why would you help your enemies? Because you're not my enemies, Jake replied. We're all cadets at the same academy. We're supposed to be learning how to work together, not how to hurt each other. Jake began carefully loosening the net around the Vorthok. He showed them exactly how the trap worked and how to avoid getting caught again. See this knot here? It's designed to tighten when you pull against it. But if you push this way instead of pulling, it comes loose easily. The Vorthok watched in fascination as Jake demonstrated the simple mechanism. Within a few minutes, all three of the big aliens were free. They rubbed their arms where the vines had held them, but they were not injured at all. You could have hurt us badly, one of the Vorthok said quietly. The net could have been made with cutting wires instead of soft vines. Yes, Jake agreed. I could have made all the traps dangerous. I could have made the falling rock hit Prince Vexstar directly instead of just knocking him into the water. I could have made the snares tight enough to break bones. But I didn't want to hurt anyone. Jake moved over to help the Ziton get untangled from the vine snares. As he worked, he explained how each trap functioned. These loops are based on slip knots. The harder you struggle, the tighter they get. But if you relax and move slowly like this, you can slide right out. The four insect aliens clicked softly to each other as Jake freed them one by one. Their black eyes watched every movement of his hands, studying how the simple mechanisms worked. This is fascinating, one of the Ziton said. We scanned this area completely yesterday. How did we not detect these traps? Because they're made from natural materials that belong here, Jake explained. The vines are just plants. The rocks are just rocks. The wood is just wood. I didn't bring anything new into the environment. I just rearranged what was already here. Prince Vexstar had climbed out of the stream and was trying to clean the mud off his purple skin. But why? He asked. You had us all defeated. You could have claimed victory and taken control of everything. Jake sat down on a large rock and looked at all the alien cadets. What would be the point of that? We still have to survive together. For the rest of today. If I had hurt you or made you angry, you would spend the whole time trying to get revenge. That doesn't help anyone. Vex, who had been silent through most of this conversation, finally spoke up. Explain your strategy, human. How did you plan all of this? Jake smiled. It started with watching all of you yesterday. Each species has natural advantages, but you also have predictable behaviors. Vorthok rely on strength and intimidation. So I knew you would eventually try to control resources by force. Ziton work as a team and move fast, so I knew you would attack in coordinated formations. Zephyrians like Prince Vexstar are proud warriors who hate to lose, so I knew he would try to fight again after being defeated. And Gornites? Vex asked. With curiosity. Gornites are patient and careful, Jake replied. I figured you would wait and watch to see what happened before deciding what to do. That's why you're the only one who didn't get caught in any traps. The alien cadets looked at each other with new understanding. They had never thought about their own behaviors being so predictable. Humans don't have thick fur or natural armor or sharp claws, Jake continued. We're not especially strong or fast or tough, but we're very good at noticing patterns and solving problems. When humans lived on Earth with much bigger and stronger animals, we learned to survive by being smarter instead of stronger. Grax scratched his scarred head with one big claw. So you studied us like we were animals? No, Jake said firmly. I studied you like you were soldiers with different training and different strengths. Every military force has its own tactics and weaknesses. The key to winning is not to fight them where they're strongest, but to change the battlefield so that your strengths matter more than theirs. Prince Vexstar was starting to understand. You turned our own behaviors against us. Not against you, Jake corrected. I just created situations where your natural instincts would lead you into traps instead of leading you to victory. Then I made sure the traps were harmless so nobody would get seriously hurt. One of the Ziton clicked thoughtfully. This is a completely different approach to conflict. We have never encountered anything like it. Most species in the galaxy seem to believe that the strongest should rule, Jake observed. But humans learned that cooperation usually works better than domination. When everyone contributes their best abilities, the whole group becomes stronger. To demonstrate his point, Jake stood up and gestured toward the water source. Right now, we have 6 cadets and only a few hours left in the exercise. We could spend that time fighting over the water, or we could work together to make sure everyone survives comfortably. What do you propose? Dex asked. Simple sharing, Jake replied. Everyone gets equal access to water. Everyone shares their remaining food. We work together to find more food sources that I might have missed while I was busy building traps. Grax. Looks suspicious. What do you get out of this deal? You won. You defeated all of us. Why share anything? Jake thought about this question carefully before answering. Because winning by making enemies is not really winning at all. Tomorrow we'll all be back at the academy together. We might end up serving on the same ships or fighting in the same battles someday. I would rather have all of you as friends, and allies than as people who hate me. The alien cadets were quiet for a long moment as they considered this idea. Finally, Prince Vexstar spoke up. I have never heard of victory without domination, he admitted. In the Zephyrian Empire, the winner takes everything and the loser gets nothing? And how often do those losers try to get revenge later? Jake asked. The prince's eyes widened as he realized the implications. Almost always, he said slowly. Most of our civil wars started because someone felt cheated by an unfair victory. Exactly, Jake said. But if everyone benefits from the outcome, there's no reason for revenge. Everyone wants the same system to continue. Vex nodded his massive stone head. This is wisdom. Gornites believe in long-term stability over short-term advantage. The Ziton clicked rapidly among themselves for several seconds. Finally, their leader spoke for the group. We accept your proposal. Equal sharing and cooperation for the remainder of the exercise. Grax was the last to agree, but eventually he nodded too. I still think you are strange, little human, but I respect what you accomplished. You defeated warriors without becoming a warrior yourself. As the group began working together to gather food and organize their remaining time, Jake felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning a competition. He had solved the real problem of the exercise, which was not just individual survival, but learning how different species could work together effectively. Word of Jake's unconventional victory spread quickly through the academy when the exercise ended. The instructors were amazed by the sensor recordings that showed how one human had neutralized an entire group of combat-trained aliens without violence or injury. But more importantly, the alien cadets returned to the academy with a completely new understanding of human capabilities. They had learned that physical strength was not the only kind of power that mattered. They had seen how intelligence, creativity, and cooperation could achieve things that force could never accomplish. Jake Miller had not just passed his survival test. He had given the entire galaxy a demonstration of what humans could contribute to the galactic community.